that was the best thing ever because I took a critical thinking class. And it was the hardest class, Katie, the hardest class, but the best I ever took. And I didn't understand. I was like, what do you mean? How does this work? Because I grew up with such lack of critical thinking skills.
Hello and welcome to this podcast conversation. This is about overcoming self-loathing, overcoming spiritual trauma, and the programming that really holds us back from being able to think, being able to grow.
I wanted to jump right into the whole conversation. It's so much. We're going to be talking about so much self-esteem, worth, the church, family triggers, and I want to say to the people watching this, like we always come at these hard subjects from a perspective of hope and coming out, and even if we're not out on the other side, we are taking the steps to walk in I can't words, but I think you're picking up what I'm putting down.
There's hope.
And
that's the word that I think is the most fantastic thing, because for me, it's kept me going. Whereas when you lose all hope, you just think there's nothing for you, right? And there always is something, and keep the hope alive to get through it, whatever you're going through. Yeah. That's like my favorite word.
It's a good one. So I wanted to jump right into your early memories of how what you were taught affected your self-esteem as a kid.
That's such a convoluted question.
I know, right? I'm so good.
There's so many things too. Because it's also in how your parents treated you and the religious aspects, right? And so like for me, I grew up, my dad is very much a Calvinist, young earth creationist. I can't remember all the things. We were kind of eclectic. Like we've been to different denominations and things like that. But the Calvinist thing, and it wasn't until like within the last year or so where I realized the total depravity really messed us up, right? Because you're constantly told you are totally depraved. There's nothing good in you. The only good in you is God, and because Jesus is in your heart and the Holy Spirit and all that. So every time somebody would compliment you or, oh, you did this good, maybe not every time. But I know, I would tell my mom, oh, somebody said you were so sweet. And she goes, it's not me, it's Jesus. So I picked up on that and I would think, it's not me, it has to be Jesus. I'm not good. So that was a huge part of like from the religious aspect that I picked up, but also having a father who's very intense and kind of a perfectionist. And if you don't think like he does or do what he thinks you should do, it's wrong. Why did you do like that? Why don't you think it like this? And so I internalized that as I'm bad. And I was always on edge. Like if I moved something on the table, like who moved this over here? Like it was just such a big deal. And I'm very highly sensitive. So for me, I internalized that. I'm like, I'm bad. I shouldn't do anything. Right. And then also being a female, there is this attitude. They don't outrightly say it, but there's an attitude of you're second class because you need to be submissive. Nobody in the church, no leader in the church is a woman. When you get married, you have to be submissive. And women really shouldn't. I mean, you can go to school and you can work, but technically it's best because if you stay home with your babies and don't work, because the children need you home all the time. So I used to wonder, if the women are just raising the kids and let's say they raise daughters to raise their children, the women don't get to do anything. That used to really bother me even as a kid. I was questioning that stuff, right? And then I felt bad for questioning it because, well, the Bible says this. Women are supposed to be a certain way.
So you have
So,
all these ideas that have been taught and placed in there of what it means to be a woman and what your worth is. And then there's the whole aspect of, well, how do you improve? How do you get better? And that we were taught about the fruit of the spirit. So can you share about how your experience was in praying for the fruit of the spirit? For those of you not familiar with the Bible, it's like peace, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, long suffering. That's another word for patience, I guess. Love. So it's all these qualities of being like the perfect person.
yes. Oh my gosh. Katie, you have no idea. Well, you do have an idea because you grew up like it. But I was just talking to on another podcast, my one of the only pastors I really still appreciate, and I've like vented to him and cried to him, and he's helping me through a lot of stuff. And I said, why did no one tell us it was hard work? Because and a lot of us felt like this. So it's not just me. Because people will say, Stephanie, that was just you. I'm like, no, I'm in the groups. I hear people talking. We were told that you need to have all the fruits of the spirit. You're going to be changed when Jesus comes into your heart, blah, blah, blah. But then you're also told it's not you, it's the Holy Spirit. It's not in your strength, so you're not supposed to do anything. So pray and read your Bible, and that'll automatically make you a better Christian. And I never really understood. I would pray, God, give me more love for people. God, give me patience. And then they would make you fearful, like saying, well, if you pray for that, God is going to test you. So then, and then I'd be scared of the test.
Okay, I changed my mind. No patience. I'm fine. I'm good.
Exactly.
Or,
So
oh, I'm asking for more love, so you're going to put a really hard to love person in my life.
yes, and I would fear that. I'm like, God, I know I need to pray for love, but I'm really scared of the person that, because you have anxiety. I was very shy and I couldn't speak up for myself. I didn't have boundaries. People would always push me down and make me feel like, I would always go, okay, I guess I'm wrong. So I was scared of all the people. So I would just be the yes person. Yes, whatever you say. Except then when I was supposed to stand up for Jesus, I was ashamed because if you don't speak up for Jesus, or if you're ashamed of Jesus, he'll be ashamed of you. So there was that fear too. But yeah, I would pray and pray, and I would like read over James and say, give me wisdom, God. I'm praying for wisdom. And it wasn't until I started reading and listening to personal development, personal growth, some of the woo woo stuff that they say we're not supposed to listen to, like law of attraction and,
Mhm.
some of the gurus.
But I want to
Um,
get into that a little bit
sorry.
later.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's
I go
fine.
off on like things.
Yeah. No, that's definitely going to be something we're going to come back to, listeners and friends, is like what actually has made a difference in growth and personal growth. I wanted to talk about who teased you and how it made you feel. Like when did like teasing start in your life and bullying in general?
I think that's a good question. I always kind of felt bullied in a sense of I'm the youngest child, I'm a girl, and I'm super shy and sensitive. So I never really got a voice in my family. Or
Mm.
if I would say something like, Stephanie, you're kind of pushed down. But then when I went to school, I went to the Christian school, which was supposed to be better. Um, and I was constantly teased by the girls, mostly the boys, but there were some mean girls in the grade above me just for being fat. And I was like, I think maybe it started when I was 8. And I hated school. I hated it so much. And it was just constantly every day. oh, so is somebody going to say something to me? Are they going to make a comment? And then I would just be like, and my dad would say, why don't you stick up for yourself? Well, I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say. I think of things to say 2 days later. I don't think of it in the moment. And you didn't teach me that. Hello, thanks for the helping me stand up for myself, and thanks
If
for
you'd
the
been, if you'd been,
empowering.
yeah, like if you'd been socialized as a boy, you would have been taught that. But girls are just, be nice and sweet and loving, and that means just being a doormat.
Yeah. So that was the weight thing has been really the biggest thing in my life, and so it started so young that it's still a trigger for me. um I mean, I can tease myself about it, like I'm like, oh yeah, my weight and whatever, and I'm okay. I don't like break down crying when people make comments about it, but when you internalize it as it is you are what you look like, and people have said that to you. And I had a boyfriend who was like, I want to marry you, but you look like this. And so it was just like, yeah, it was, it's hard, right? Because you just want to be loved for who you are. So I think I overcompensated with being too nice too, right? People pleaser. I want you to love me.
Yeah. So how was it seeing people who could handle their emotions? Like, did you see other people that got teased that were able to brush it off, or?
um, I did. And it was those people who could just kind of turn it around, make fun of it, or just like pass it off. And I was like, how do they do that? Right. And there's an episode of The Office when Michael falls into the koi pond and he's so embarrassed. And Jim says to him, just laugh and everyone will just be nicer to you. And you're not really taught that, or I wasn't taught that growing up. Right. Also, I didn't know how. I was too scared. Um, but it's true. When you start making fun of yourself, you're like, oh, you're right. People are like, oh, it's not so bad. Or they minimize it, or just like, oh no, I didn't mean it like that. Because you're kind of putting them in their place a little bit, right? Because you're like, it's not going to bother me. But when it bothers you, that's when they know they got you.
But how did it feel to see people handle their emotions and wanting that?
I admired that so much, but I thought that's not for me. And I don't know if it was because I would see women who were able to handle their emotions, but I was taught that we're just full of emotions and men don't have emotions. So I had so much emotion because I had anxiety, depression, I was highly sensitive. I was overwhelmed a lot and I burst into tears, or people don't listen or they don't, if you set boundaries and then they overstep them, you freak out. And so I thought, well, this is just what women do. And also in the media, it's not just in the Christian environment, it's in the media, right? The hysterical woman who's like stalking the guy and she's so needy. And he's like, oh, this is what women are like. I thought, well, women are like this. We're supposed to be weirdo like this. And men just like it because they want sex and that's it. So I didn't really know. Um, but I was so jealous of people who could handle their emotions. And especially like I love watching Survivor, and I see some of these people who with just such grace and composure they're able to, they get voted out and they're like, hey, you got me. And I'm like, how do they do that? How are they not freaking out so angry and like yelling like some of the others? And I just thought, how do people do this?
Mm.
I wanted to know.
Oh, something that you said about that's just how women are made me think about how it's so interesting that there's these two different versions of women. There's the worldly image that, tight clothes, kinky walk. And then there's, the brown paper bag church women.
Oh, plain Jane, you have to put on the baggy clothes so you're not form-fitting clothes so men don't lust after you. I know women like that.
Because it's all your fault what men think
Yeah.
and do, obviously.
And I think I talked to another friend that we grew up together, and she was saying, I think I gained weight because you're kind of scared of men lusting after you. So if you gain weight, maybe they won't. I can identify with that. I was scared, like, oh no, if men are going to look at me like that, first of all, it makes you uncomfortable. And second, it's your fault. So if you don't want them to do that, you kind of don't look your best, maybe. I don't know.
Hmm. It's a
It's,
fascinating topic, dude. Like,
yeah,
as
it's very convoluted.
I was too skinny as a kid. Like, I felt like nobody was paying any attention to me or hearing my voice because I didn't take up enough space. Like, I wanted to be bigger so that I would be noticed.
Wow. And see, I probably would have been jealous of you as a kid because I'm like, but you're skinny. How are you not? That's the ultimate. I thought that was the ultimate.
The grass is always greener.
It is. I actually had a coworker and she was very thin. And I said, you're so skinny. And I was so jealous. I'm like, I wish I looked like you. And she said, that's offensive. And I was like, what do you mean? I had no idea. This was like 20 years ago. And she said, I can't gain weight. And even my doctor, people think I'm anorexic. And I said to her, oh my goodness, I would love to be your weight. Like you can have some of mine. So it's really interesting. That was the first time I realized skinny people also have issues. I didn't know.
And I wanted to switch gears a little bit, but still along the same track, like adjacent to the track of more wanting to hear more of your thoughts about in church, what does it mean to be a woman and single?
Oh, it's the worst. So when I was younger, I think as a teenager, I said, if I'm single and 30, I'm going to kill myself. And I don't know if I actually meant it because I was too scared of death, but I was so terrified of being an old maid. And you because of purity culture, a lot of people wanted to get married and have sex right away. Sorry, you're
Not good
drinking.
to burn with lust. Just as soon as you find someone you like, hitch up.
So that's the joke, right? That's why they get married at 19, 20. And there are some mature people who can get married and they have a wonderful relationship. They're married forever. That's great. But I think that's rare. I think more so people are just, I have to get married. And it's like, I've just been watching the show Bridgerton on Netflix. Oh my God, Katie, it's so amazing. But that's how I kind of feel about like the courtship. We were going through the Joshua Harris, my parents were like, oh, we should do the courtship thing. And you're not supposed to really be alone in the room. You're supposed to have like group dates. And I was like, oh my word, they were doing this in the 1800s. Why were we talking about this in the early 2000s? This is so pathetic. Um, but when I started, like I didn't have a boyfriend because I was too scared of boys and I didn't think they liked me. And I couldn't even look people in the eye. I was super shy. And then you're 25 and you feel old because you're single. And then you're going to all the weddings, going to all the baby showers, and then you hit 30. And that's when I actually moved to Toronto and I went back to school. And I thought, okay, Christian university, new church, I'm in a new city, I'm going to find a husband. Thank God I didn't. Oh, because I would have found somebody who I thought I wanted, but not somebody now that I would want. But it's really hard. You're put in with a college and career when you're in your 30s and 40s. These are like 20-year-olds and you just don't fit. You don't connect. And there's also a kind of, you get put with the weird singles because a lot of them are very awkward and weird. And you're just like, I don't belong with these people. And you want to make friends with people your age, but most of them are married with children. So they want to be with the other families. So it can feel very lonely. And then you're also told certain things like, well, if you want to get married, you shouldn't want it because then you're not going to get it.
Yeah, don't have dreams because God will ask to take that dream away from you.
Yeah. And are you should be preparing yourself. Like don't want don't look for what you want in a person, like be that yourself, which is great advice because we need to grow ourselves. We need the person I am now is not who I was when I was in my 30s even. And the person in my 30s, I would have found a guy who was unhealthy, and I did. But now I'm like, okay, I'm growing. So that is good advice. But at the same time, when you feel kind of, well, you're married and you kind of look down on me because I'm single in a way, you make comments. People say, well, I had a friend and they said, oh, you're pretty. Why are you single? And she goes, that, you get certain comments and it's just, it makes you feel this small.
Mm.
So, and then everyone, like, it's all about family in the church. They talk about how the bride of Christ, and it's like the man and wife is like Jesus in the church, and blah, blah, blah. And it's all about how the family is the ultimate thing that can ever happen. And really, they don't talk about, hey, singles, you have a purpose too. Well, you can be a missionary because you're single and it's okay if you die. I had a friend that somebody said that to her.
Oh,
You might as well be a missionary if you're single. Thanks. My life means nothing to you.
so you mentioned that you actually did get into a relationship that was not great.
I met him at church.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Like how long did it take for you guys to kind of become a couple, and how long did it take him to show his true colors?
well, that was such a weird relationship. He had some mental health issues. Um, and he would say that he's like, I'm not healthy. I shouldn't be in a relationship. But he was back and forth all the time. And but we connected right away. And he was so good looking. And he was talking, he loved apologetics, which was, I loved it too. And he was so smart. He knew his theology. And I thought, oh, that's so sexy. And we started out as friends, actually. I really enjoyed talking to him, hanging out with him. And he's like, you're one of my best friends. And then I really developed such strong feelings for him. And it was the first time I really actually had a, a guy who was a friend who I had feelings for. Um, but it was so rough. I was in school and I like I cried all the time. He would break up with me 1 month and then the next month I love you and then break up with me and then say you're not my ideal, you look like this and you need to be skinnier and you need to, and it was off and on for 5 years, Katie. I was in love with him and I thought he was the one God had for me because I wrote things on my list like we need to be friends first and he must be a Calvinist and he must love theology, and I thought this was the one, which that is so dangerous. Because my friends were like, this guy is so toxic, you deserve way better. And it took me like 5 years or 4 years to realize it was in this moment when I was hanging out with him and he was just going on and I was like, oh, is this what it's like? He doesn't even ask me, how are you? How was your day? It's just like first thing is like politics and blah blah. And I was like, ew, ew. It just hit me. Ew, this guy's gross. And then he broke up with me. And I was like, damn it, I should have said something first. Cause he's like, I'm so sorry I hurt you. And I was just like, no, I'm good. And it was just like such a release, right? Oh, goodbye.
Oh, that's so great that you got that moment of clarity to make it that you could, the band-aid has been ripped off already. Like, this is
But it,
not the future I see myself in.
right. But the sad thing was that I thought, like, I was so desperate to find a husband. I was so desperate to be loved that I was still holding out on that. And I couldn't love myself. So I was unhealthy too, which is why I, you know, kind of they talk about, why are people single? There's something wrong with you. Well, people get married in our relationships and they're unhealthy. Like it doesn't mean that single people are unhealthy and all the married people are healthy.
Was there something in your life that kind of led to that moment of clarity, of the moment?
Well, I was really struggling. I had a very stressful job that I hated, and I was just doing like church. I was studying opera and I was working, and I was just so stressed all the time. And I thought when he called, I would be like, oh, it's so nice to hear him. But he would just go on and on about politics, and he was into conspiracy theories. And he would get mad at me. He's like, you don't believe me. Well, I do more research than you do. I study this and you don't. And I'm like, F you, dude. I'm like working and you barely get by. If we got married, I'd be the one having to do all the stuff, and I'd come home and you're not even going to say, how are you? I think it was just as I was growing,
Mm.
having like going to school, and then the job I was in, and I was just not the person I was when I first met him.
Was what you were studying in school something that kind of helped you to get out of the poisonous mindsets?
Yes, I studied. Well, I first went back to school to study psychology, but then I switched to philosophy. And that was the best thing ever because I took a critical thinking class. And it was the hardest class, Katie, the hardest class, but the best I ever took. And I didn't understand. I was like, what do you mean? How does this work? Because I grew up with such lack of critical thinking skills. And but it was just amazing, and I was so grateful to have taken that. So yeah, and then just meeting different people, different friends who would encourage me and say, you know, people like this guy are not helpful. And my pastor in Toronto, he was so great. He's like, you got to cut this guy loose. So
Mm.
I was really great.
How does the critical thinking go against go against how we're raised?
Because we're taught we just have to believe what we're given by our parents and by our pastors. We're not really supposed to question authority. And I mean, I also grew up under, you have to be like conservative Republican. And there was no, it always bothered me because I would see, and I don't want it to be like the left is all good and the right is all bad. Like we need each other and there's good and bad on both sides. But a lot of times I would see the right is always against stuff, just like the evangelicals, like we're against gay marriage and we're against this and that. And the left is like, they would just seem more loving and kind. And they're the ones doing the food banks and doing this. Like there are churches doing that stuff, but it was also more like the liberal kind of attitude, but they were the bad guys. And so my dad always, evil liberals, like literally, he always calls everyone evil liberal. So you start to question, but then you just accept, well, you're scared to question. If I'm not Republican or I'm not conservative, I'm in Canada, so conservative. Um, you're scared to question because you might not be a Christian anymore and you might go to hell. Like it's so pathetic. I was scared to question all of those. So you just kind of accept things that you're told.
But critical thinking is like arrows of why and going deeper and deeper, isn't it?
And where's the evidence, or why like this way of thinking is actually a fallacy? And so that was the hardest thing for my mind to accept, the fallacies, because I grew up with so many fallacies. I grew up with a lot of red herrings, like, or the gaslighting to turn it back on you, so you're confused all the time. You say, well, you did this, well, you did that, and you did this, and then it's back to shaming you, and you're like, what happened? You don't know what's happening. And I felt like I never knew what was happening my whole life, and I never had a voice, and so critical thinking was just mind-blowing for me.
And what about the discrepancies and fallacies of how the Christian world addresses mental health versus how the secular world addresses mental health?
Yeah, that was a big one for me because I had anxiety and depression my whole life, pretty much. And it was always, am I sinning? And then you get thrown the verses, do not be anxious for everything, but in, wait, what is
But
it?
with
But in
prayer and
prayer and
supplication,
supplication
in all things, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which blah 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 blah, blah.
surpasses all understanding of something, something. And
So it's like, have you tried not being anxious?
exactly, which doesn't work, because if you tell somebody don't be anxious, they're more anxious because they're worried about being anxious. Yeah. And there are Christians who are actually, and don't get me started on biblical counselors, but like actual Christians who go to university, study psychology. That's important. And they understand that, I mean, there's a lot of different things. You can have depression because you're a negative person, and you know, and that's happened to me. You can also have chemical imbalance in your brain, and you can also have trauma that's keep, you know, or like there's so many different things, but they lump it all into one, right? um and so it was just, I never really got help until really I saw secular counselors. I did go to Christian ones, but it was always bringing the Bible into it. And secular ones would explain things and try to help me change my mindset, or like the cognitive behavioral therapy that really helped me a lot. And also just understanding, hey, you've gone through some trauma, your brain is going like this, and that's why you're reacting like this. Your body remembers. So you're anxious. I remember one time I was having an anxiety attack, and my sister's like, why are you anxious? There's literally nothing that happened. And I said, I don't know. But now I do. Maybe it was a smell. Maybe it was something my body happened to remember. And it just like, and you don't know what's happening. And then you're blamed. Like, why? You shouldn't be anxious.
And
Thanks.
in the flavor of Christianity that I was raised in, that would have just, they would have thrown the blanket over that of just saying, oh, that's an attack from the devil.
Yes, that too. Satan's attacking you.
Yeah, it's
Everything's
all
an attack.
spiritual. There's nothing physical.
Yeah. And then you're just like, pray away. Go, Satan, get behind me, Satan. Remember? I always try to say that stuff.
I believe it. I still believe that it's both in a way, that there is spiritual stuff, but we are also physical. We also need to know about chemical imbalances and medicine and these things that
And
exist.
meditation. Just deep breathing, calming your what is it, your autonomic nervous system. I remember like mentioning meditation, and oh, you can meditate on God's word, but you do not just sit there and just think nothing, because that's evil, that's Buddhism, that's New Age. And it's like, uh,
Have they
so
read
you're,
the Bible? Because not just meditating on God's word, but just plain meditating is mentioned many times in the Bible.
oh, is it? I didn't even know
Yeah,
that.
it is. They don't even read this book, and they accuse everybody else of cherry picking. Anyway, do you remember if it was like a specific book or person or thought that kind of just reached you and pulled you out of, like, whoa, I'm a little bit more free now of a lot of this stuff.
For me, it's actually been a whole bunch of things. Um, it did start, oh man, I mean, it's kind of been going on for like 20 years, but over
Mm.
the last 2 years has been really when I'm thinking, oh, wait, I'm deconstructing now. I really want to know what's happening. But it kind of started. I have some friends from high school who came out to me as gay, and they were scared telling me. And one of them I lost for a few years because we had a huge fight because I told her it was wrong. And now she's one of my best friends, like, and because we made up. But questioning, like, why these people are like the most amazing people I know. They're some of my best friends. And I was told by Christian friends, like, you shouldn't hang out with gay people. Like, that started me questioning. It always bothered me. And then when I was just like, I don't care. I don't care what this verse says. Whatever. I don't want to deal with like even saying that they're wrong. Like, I don't want any of that. These are my friends and I love them and I affirm them. That was so freeing. Um, and then I read a book by Grant Mullen. He's actually a Canadian psychologist or psychiatrist. Can't remember what the book is called, but he talks about mental health and he says, yeah, sometimes you need medication, sometimes you need this. So it wasn't all just pray it away. And that was really helpful. Um, and then I'd start watching atheist YouTubers, progressive YouTubers, listening to how Christians sound. And they're like, why do Christians say this? It sounds like they're in a cult. This is so condescending. And I was like, oh, we sound condescending and self-righteous? I had no idea.
It's so valuable to get that other perspective.
Oh, it is. It so is. And then you start learning about some of the social issues. Like 2020, and I've heard this from so many people, and I'm sure you have too, right? First Trump, right? Then the pandemic, and then when George Floyd died. And it always bothered me when I would hear people of color say, why are we not heard? And they would try to explain. And, we would listen to Ben Shapiro and all these right wing commentators, and they're just poo pooing it. And I was like, but there's something there. And that's when I just like, I don't care what Ben Shapiro says. I want to know. So I started listening to people of color and talking with them. And I'm like, what is it? And I wanted to know so desperately. And I'm sorry, like I get really emotional about this because I wish I had known that years ago. But you're so scared of not being a conservative. Um, and that really pissed me off when the reaction by many Christian people were just to ignore it or to say, oh, why are they saying this? No, we're like white. They get all upset when you talk about white supremacy and so they're not listening. And I was like, if we're people who love God, love Jesus, why don't we care what's happening to other people? Why don't we care? And that really started questioning because it was most of my conservative Christian friends and family that didn't give a shit. And I'm like, this is wrong. This is so wrong. And then I started listening to like I met Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals, and I listened to his podcast and just different groups on Facebook that have just been so helpful in unraveling a lot of the political crap, a lot of the history, like Jesus and John Wayne.
Mm.
The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. Like these are showing us stuff that we've been believing. That's just crap that Christians have made up.
Yeah, just man-made things added to the Bible, and the true Scotsman fallacy. Like, this is what it
Wow.
means to be a Christian. Jesus didn't say anything like that, sirs.
And it's so freeing because there's always something inside of you that we're like, okay, Jesus talks about loving your neighbor, but we're so judgmental and we don't love, right? And there are Christians who do. I'm just saying, like, my experience is very much judgment, critical, you're bad, you're going to hell, that kind of attitude. And it was just always there's a disconnect. It doesn't make sense. So when you
So
start to question it, you're like, oh, that's why it doesn't make sense, because it doesn't make sense.
it is so encouraging to find these other spaces and communities where there's people who still have managed to hold on to their faith and push against the rhetoric of the evangelicals and the conservatives and gender fundamentalists. Like, nope, that's
And
not good enough.
you know what's funny? Like, we need labels sometimes to understand and to explain, but it's also like the labels can be so damaging. But it's also, how do I explain this? And my cousin, he's Lutheran, and he said evangelicals in Lutheranism is different than, like, what do you mean by evangelicals? And I was like, I don't even know. But like, when I just kind of say like right wing Trump supporter dudes who stormed the Capitol.
The
Oh, that's what you mean. Yeah, that's what I mean, dude.
ones who say that being only Christians have true joy, and they're the least happy, most angry, scared, frustrated people out there.
Yes. Why? Where's the joy? I was always like, where's this freedom in Christ? Where's this joy we're supposed to have? I never
Yeah.
had it. I
If
was
heaven,
trying.
if heaven means spending eternity with you guys, ah, you wrote a children's book.
Oh,
How does
yeah.
that connect to all to your journey and yeah, let's hear about that.
Oh, I didn't have a copy with me. I should
Oh,
have.
dang.
Um, so the children's book is called What Should Dragon Do? And it's actually stories of living with roommates and just funny things that happened when people got upset and act. I had some amazing roommates and I had some very kind of crazy kooky ones. And we were all Christians, which was funny. But yeah, so in 2020, I was because I was thinking, hey, these are funny stories. When I tell my other friends, they're like, that's hilarious. And I thought I was gonna write it into just a book. But if they're an adult book and people are like, oh, who was this about or whatever. So I thought, actually, I think these would be funny for like a cartoon, for a children's book. And I just started writing and I got uh illustrator on Fiverr who was really great. And then I found a self-publisher. So that was the first thing I've ever like I've always wanted to write. And I was really excited to have that come out last year.
Did you use that for processing any of the tough things, of the tough situations with the roommates?
Yeah, it was because it's just, I mean, now it's humorous. At the time, it was very stressful, and certain people, like I was always passive aggressive because I didn't know how to stand up for myself. And with some of these people, I would try to say something, but then they'd get angry at me and I'd be like retreating.
Mm.
So at the time when these some of these situations would happen, I didn't know what to do. And I would just kind of like let them do it. Or one of the other roommates would talk to them and say, okay, because they were better at handling certain people. I always had a hard time. Um, but now I think that would have been good for me to like now I'd be able to better stand up against some of these because they were bullies. Um, but now it's just funny because
Mm.
you look back and you're like, oh, this was so stupid. And then it's like little tiny things that get people upset. So you're thinking, okay. But obviously, these people also have issues. There's something going on with them that's triggering them.
Do you
So
think that this book could also help kids to get that perspective that maybe they're not getting from other places of how to grow and deal with things?
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of books out there. There's probably books very similar to mine, but it talks about how we can be kind even in these when something upsets us. Um, we don't have to react. We can respond. And it asks the questions like it says, this is what happened, it tells a story and then says, what should Dragon do? She could have done this. So it kind of gives kids a different perspective on how she could have handled the situation better.
So what's the age level to and how can we get a hold of this book?
The age level is like 3 to 6. Um, and you can find it on Amazon.com or .ca, Barnes and Noble, and in Canada, like Chapters, Indigo. Basically, yeah, online.
Well, I will put links down below for people who want to check that out and buy it. Buy Stephanie's book. I'm sure it's going to be awesome.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah. And the last thing that I wanted to say was to give you the chance to say was to give you the chance to look at the camera and speak to that younger version of yourself that was really stuck in self-loathing and being misunderstood, and speak to the people out there that don't like themselves, who don't have
Mm.
hope. And what would you say to them?
Oh, there's so many things, but I would say even if you feel like you're worthless or like sometimes we can see other people doing things and, well, those people do that stuff, not me. I can't do that. But when I started believing and knowing that we were all unique, we're all here for a purpose, we all have something to do on this earth. It doesn't matter if so and so's doing it, you can also do it. And that helps me so much. So we were here for a purpose. Also, trust your gut. And that was one thing we weren't allowed to do because we were totally depraved, and you just had to, like, well, what's God think I should do? And I understand because we don't always have the wisdom, but deep down you have a feeling. If there's something that you made a decision and then you can't sleep at night and you're just ruminating over it, your body is telling you something, your spirit's telling you something, whatever, that is not the right decision. So if I knew to trust my gut years before, I would have made very different decisions. And I wouldn't have followed other people's advice. That's another thing I would say. I used to ask everyone for advice, and I'd get all these different opinions, and I was overwhelmed and stressed. And I thought, I need to listen to these people. No, I don't, because whenever I followed their advice, unless it's advice, if I ask you for advice and it's wise, yes, that has happened. But otherwise, people also just give you unsolicited advice. You should do this. You should go to this school. You should take this job. And you were like, I don't want to. Trust that, because you know better than that person who doesn't even know you. They don't know what you're dealing with, right? They just don't know.
Yeah. That has been a huge, huge theme of a lot of the conversations I've had. Listen,
yes,
trust your gut. There is a thing and spark inside of you that knows that you deserve to be treated better. That when a teaching that you've known your whole life just doesn't feel like God. It doesn't feel like love. It's
no,
the filter is wrong, like to not be scared of that growth process, but to embrace it, because you're becoming who you're meant to be. And there's a lot more freedom and happiness over on this side of Christianity.
yes, yes. Oh, and another thing is, affirmations and positive thinking isn't evil. It's
No.
okay to say, I'm amazing, I'm confident, I'm capable. It's okay to start. Actually, there are biblical verses
Yeah.
that actually refer to this. We haven't been told that that's what they mean,
Yeah.
right?
Like
So
you
it's
mentioned
like, oh, the positive thinking, oh, that's new age, that's this. No, why? You're just reinforcing my negative thinking. So that's another thing. If I had known that 20 years ago, maybe I would have been able to grow a little bit quicker. I don't know, but
yeah, like you mentioned, another thing that's a big hot button for fundamentalist culture of not like manifesting, what's the other thing called, where you think positively and positive things will come your way?
law of attraction.
Law of attraction, like that's reaping and sowing. It's just wearing a different jacket.
Yes, that's also the self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Because if you believe something about yourself, you start acting like it becomes that. That's psychology. Whereas I was constantly told, no, that's evil, that's new age. Oh, for crying out loud. That's what started giving me hope. Is when I was watching those videos and I was like, wait, I can take charge of my life. I don't have to wait for God to fix my to like give me a job. I didn't know that. And I know that sounds so pathetic to some people, but when you're told like you have to wait for God's timing and you have to wait for this, you're too scared to say, oh, I should start.
Yeah.
But if you're not moving, if you're not starting, how are you going to get anywhere? Life's just going to happen to you instead of you making it happen. I wish I knew that 20 years ago too. It's so much fun always talking with you, Katie. And I have to say, you are doing amazing things. I am so excited for you. I'm so proud of you. And your channel is growing and being amazing. And you're helping people by having these issues come forward. I mean, if it wasn't for people talking about religious trauma and all this stuff, I wouldn't even know what it was I was struggling with, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a passion to put stories out there and help other people to hopefully, plant the seed in somebody's ear, in somebody's brain, that it can get better. There is freedom, there is happiness. Yes. So the way that I end my conversations is I give hugs. Hugs to you. Hugs to you watching this. Thank you for being here. If you're still here, please comment something like, I watch every single episode of the Epic Kate Show. Nailed it. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time on the Epic Kate Show. I hope you will stick around, check out my vlogs and other videos, and just be a part of this awesome community that we are building. Bye! Hugs!